In the rugged Montana territory, a gang of ruthless outlaws targets what seems to be an easy mark, a quiet widow living alone on the outskirts of Pine Valley. Their fatal mistake becomes clear when the seemingly helpless woman's lightning-fast shooting leaves 6 bandits dead in her front yard, their guns barely clearing their holsters. Before we continue this tale of vengeance and justice, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's story will leave you speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind whistled through Pine Valley, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and approaching winter. Sarah Morrison stood on her cabin's porch, her slender frame wrapped in a simple black dress that betrayed nothing of the deadly skill she possessed. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, revealing eyes that had seen more than their share of both triumph and tragedy. The setting sun cast long shadows across her well-maintained property, the last rays of light glinting off the small silver shooting medal she wore as a pendant, the only visible reminder of her past life. The Morrison homestead stood as a testament to careful maintenance and quiet dignity. The cabin's walls were solid pine, weathered but strong, much like its owner. A neat vegetable garden lay to one side, while a small barn housed her 2 horses and the essential tools of ranching life. It was the kind of place that spoke of peaceful solitude, but today, that peace was about to be shattered. The quiet of the evening was broken by the distant sound of hooves approaching along the winding dirt road that led to her isolated homestead. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to adjust the long shawl she wore, ensuring it concealed the custom-made Colt revolver holstered at her hip. The weapon had been a gift from her late husband, James, though few knew the true story behind it or the skills she had honed long before becoming a widow. In town, rumors had been circulating about the Hawkins gang moving into the territory. Wild Bill Hawkins and his band of cutthroats had already hit 3 homesteads in the past month, their violence escalating with each raid. Sheriff Marcus Clayton, for all his good intentions, seemed powerless to stop them. The gang was too numerous, too well organized, and too brutal for the small town's limited law enforcement. Just last week, they'd burned the Peterson place to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes and bitter memories. Emma Thompson, who ran the general store in Pine Valley, had warned Sarah just yesterday about suspicious riders asking questions about outlying properties. "They were particularly interested in yours, Sarah," Emma had said, her voice tight with concern. "Being a widow living alone, they think you're vulnerable." Sarah had simply nodded, knowing that this perception was both a curse and a potential advantage. The approaching riders were closer now. Sarah could make out at least 4 distinct hoofbeats. Her fingers brushed against the smooth wooden grip of her hidden revolver, a touch as natural to her as breathing. Few people alive knew that before. Becoming Mrs. Morrison, she had been Sarah Sharp Eye Williams, the most decorated shooting champion west of the Mississippi. Fewer still knew that her marriage to James hadn't just been about love. It had been a partnership between 2 of the finest marksmen in the territory. Dr. Benjamin Fuller was one of the few who knew her secret. He had been there the day James died, not from a bandit's bullet as most believed, but from a rattlesnake's bite, a cruel twist of fate for a man who had faced down countless gunfighters. In his final moments, James had made the doctor promise to keep Sarah's past private, knowing that anonymity might one day save her life. "The world's changing, Ben," James had whispered through the pain. "Sometimes the best protection is being underestimated." The riders emerged from the tree line, their horses' hooves kicking up dust in the fading light. Sarah counted 6 men, led by a figure she recognized from wanted posters, Jake "Snake Eyes" Cooper, Wild Bill Hawkins' right-hand man. Their confident postures and casual approach suggested they expected to find nothing more threatening than a helpless widow. Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile, remembering the shooting competitions she'd won against men twice her size who had made the same mistake. "Evening, ma'am," Cooper called out, his voice carrying a false note of politeness that didn't match the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Hope we're not disturbing you at this late hour." Behind him, the Turner twins exchanged knowing looks, their hands resting casually near their holsters. The remaining men spread out in a practiced formation that spoke of military experience. Deserters, most likely, turned to a life of crime after the war. Sarah adopted the timid posture expected of a widow, keeping her right hand hidden in the folds of her shawl. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steady but deliberately uncertain. Old Tom Baker, who helped with her ranch work, had taught her that the best advantage in any fight was being underestimated. The elderly ranch hand had seen his share of violence in his younger days and had become one of her most trusted confidants. Cooper dismounted, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed earth. "Actually, ma'am, we're here to help you. These are dangerous times for a woman living alone. We're offering our protection services." His smile widened, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "For a reasonable fee, of course." Sarah took a step back, playing her role perfectly. "I'm afraid I don't have much money, sir. Times have been hard since my James passed." Her words carried just the right tremor of fear, even as her mind calculated distances and angles with the precision that had made her famous in another life. Pine Valley stirred to life as dawn broke over the Montana mountains, the news of the shooting at the Morrison homestead spreading like wildfire. Sarah stood in her kitchen, calmly brewing coffee as Dr. Benjamin Fuller examined the bodies strewn across her front yard. Sheriff Marcus Clayton had arrived shortly after sunrise, his weathered face a mixture of awe and concern as he surveyed the scene. "6 shots, 6 kills, the sheriff muttered, crouching beside one of the fallen outlaws. "Never seen anything like it, not even in the war." He straightened up, adjusting his badge that had lost its shine over years of compromise and defeat. "Mrs. Morrison, you want to tell me how a rancher's widow manages something like this?" Sarah poured 3 cups of coffee, her movements measured and precise. "A woman living alone needs to know how to protect herself, Sheriff." She handed cups to both men, the morning light catching the silver medal around her neck. "James taught me well before he passed." Dr. Fuller caught her eye briefly, silently acknowledging the lie. He had known both Sarah and James in their glory, days when they dominated shooting competitions across 3 territories. The doctor busied himself with his coffee, letting Sarah maintain her carefully constructed facade. "Well, whatever the case," Clayton continued, "this is going to bring trouble. Snake Eyes Cooper wasn't just any bandit. He was Wild Bill Hawkins' right hand, and Hawkins, he doesn't take kindly to losing his men." The sheriff's hand unconsciously moved to his gun belt, where his revolver hung heavy with the weight of past failures. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Emma Thompson came riding up in her wagon, accompanied by old Tom Baker on his ancient mare. Emma's usually cheerful face was drawn with worry as she climbed down, her skirts rustling in the morning breeze. "Sarah, thank God you're all right," Emma rushed forward, embracing her friend. "Rose Martinez came to the store at first light, telling wild stories about shooting and—" She trailed off, finally noticing the bodies. "Good Lord above." Tom Baker dismounted slowly, his joints creaking with age. The former ranch hand's eyes swept the scene with professional assessment. "Clean shots, all of them," he noted, his voice gruff with approval. "Your James taught you better than most men I've known, Mrs. Morrison." Sarah set her coffee cup down carefully. "Tom, I think I'll be needing those extra hands we discussed for the ranch, especially now." The old rancher nodded, understanding the real meaning behind her words. They both knew that Hawkins wouldn't let this pass unanswered. "I'll send word to some friends," Tom replied, his weathered face grim. "Good men who know how to handle trouble." He'd served with several former cavalry soldiers who'd settled in the territory, men who hadn't lost their taste for justice. Sheriff Clayton shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Mrs. Morrison, I can't officially sanction any kind of—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. Private security force. But given the circumstances, I suppose I might be too busy in town to notice who comes and goes from your property. Dr. Fuller spoke up, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. Marcus, we all know what's coming. Hawkins has been bleeding this territory dry for months while the law stood by. Maybe it's time we stopped playing by his rules. The morning sun climbed higher, throwing long shadows across the yard as the men discussed plans for disposing of the bodies. Sarah excused herself and went inside, climbing the stairs to the bedroom she had once shared with James. From beneath a loose floorboard, she retrieved a wooden box she hadn't opened since his death. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside lay her past, competition medals, newspaper clippings celebrating Sharp Eye Sarah Williams, and beneath them all a custom gun belt crafted to her exact specifications. The leather was still supple, the holster positioned for a cross-draw that had been her signature in the competition circuit. Sarah ran her fingers over the tooled leather, remembering. Emma found her there, staring at the opened box. I knew there was more to your story than you let on, she said softly, closing the bedroom door behind her. The way you carry yourself, the look in your eyes sometimes. You're no ordinary rancher's widow. Sarah began strapping on the gun belt, its familiar weight settling on her hips like a long-lost friend. James and I met at a shooting competition in St. Louis, she explained, checking the draw. He was the only man there who wasn't threatened by a woman who could outshoot him. We were partners in every sense of the word. And now? Emma asked, watching as Sarah retrieved additional ammunition from the box. Now I finish what we started. James and I came to Pine Valley to build something good, something worth protecting. Hawkins and his kind. They destroy everything they touch. Sarah's voice hardened. I won't let them destroy our home. Outside, more riders were approaching. Tom Baker's friends, no doubt. Sarah could hear the sheriff giving instructions, his voice carrying the renewed confidence of a man who'd finally found his courage. Dr. Fuller's wagon creaked as he loaded the bodies, each thud a reminder of the violence to come. Emma touched the silver medal around Sarah's neck. You should know. Hawkins has a camp up in Devil's Creek Canyon. The Turner twins weren't there last night. They're his best shooters. And there are rumors he's recruited more men from over the territorial line. Sarah checked her revolver, one last time before returning it to its holster. Good. Let them come. It's time they learned that some wildcats don't need claws to be deadly. She smiled grimly. They just need 6 bullets and the will to use them. The morning stretched on as Pine Valley prepared for war, not knowing that the quiet widow they'd embraced was about to become their most fearsome defender. In Devil's Creek Canyon, Wild Bill Hawkins was already planning his revenge, unaware that he was about to face an opponent unlike any he'd encountered before. Oh, don't you worry about that, widow, Cooper said, climbing the porch steps with deliberate slowness. I'm sure we can come to some kind of arrangement. Behind him, his men spread out in a practiced formation, their intentions clear in their malicious grins. What happened next would be talked about in Pine Valley for years to come. Later, young Rose Martinez, who had been gathering herbs nearby, would swear she had never seen anyone move so fast in her life. As Cooper reached for Sarah's arm, her shawl fell away, revealing the gleaming Colt. 6 shots rang out in rapid succession, each finding its mark with deadly precision. Cooper's shock was still etched on his face as he fell, never having cleared his holster. The setting sun painted the scene in shades of crimson as Sarah Morrison stood alone on her porch, gun smoke curling from her revolver's barrel. 6 bodies lay scattered across her front yard, a message to any other outlaws who might mistake a widow's solitude for weakness. In the distance, a lone rider who had witnessed everything spurred his horse hard toward Wild Bill Hawkins' camp. The real war was about to begin. Devil's Creek Canyon lived up to its name as Wild Bill Hawkins received the news of Snake Eyes Cooper's death. The outlaw leader's camp, nestled deep in the twisted maze of red rock walls, erupted with curses and the sound of breaking glass as Hawkins hurled a whiskey bottle against the canyon wall. The Turner twins, Samuel and Daniel, watched their leaders rage with careful neutrality, their identical faces masking years of calculated survival. A widow? Hawkins spat, his scarred face twisted with disbelief. You're telling me Snake Eyes? And 5 of my best men were killed by some rancher's grieving woman. The scout who'd witnessed the shooting shrank back, aware that messengers of bad news often paid a deadly price in Hawkins's camp. She moved like lightning, boss, the scout stammered. Never seen anything like it. 6 shots, 6 dead, couldn't have taken more than 3 seconds. He wiped nervous sweat from his brow, even though the autumn air was cool in the canyon's shadows. Samuel Turner stepped forward, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made the twins legendary in 3 territories. Bill, that description sounds familiar. Remember those stories from back in St. Louis? The shooting competition circuit? Daniel nodded, completing his brother's thoughts as they often did. Sharp Eye, Sarah Williams. She was famous before she disappeared about 5 years ago. Married some rancher and vanished from the circuit. Hawkins' eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. He'd lost money betting against her once, back when he'd still been trying to maintain a legitimate appearance. Sarah Williams, he mused, running a finger along the deep scar that marked his left cheek. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Charlie the Ghost Matthews, Hawkins's tracker, emerged silently from the shadows where he'd been listening. The Morrison place is well positioned, he reported in his characteristic whisper. High ground on 3 sides, clear lines of sight to any approach. And Tom Baker's been busy. I counted at least 8 fresh horses in their barn this morning. Baker? Hawkins turned to his lieutenant. The old ranch hand? Former cavalry scout, Charlie corrected. Served with distinction in the war. He's been recruiting. I recognize some faces. Carter brothers from Sweetwater, Miller and his boys from Triple R, even old Santiago from the Border Patrol. Hawkins paced the camp, his spurs ringing against stone as he considered this new information. The Morrison widow wasn't just deadly. She was gathering allies. His original plan for a quick, violent revenge would need revision. Send word to the Blackwater gang, he ordered, referring to his occasional allies in the next territory. Tell them I'm calling in my marker. And get a message to those Mexican bandits we worked with last spring, the ones led by that crazy colonel. Offer them a cut of the next 3 raids. Samuel Turner raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of firepower for one widow, Bill. This isn't about the widow anymore, Hawkins snarled, his hand unconsciously touching the scar on his cheek. This is about sending a message. Nobody crosses the Hawkins gang and lives to tell about it. I want Pine Valley to burn, and I want Sarah Morrison to watch it happen. Back in Pine Valley, the town was transforming. Sarah stood in her barn, surveying the small force Tom Baker had assembled. 8 experienced gunmen, all with their own reasons to hate Hawkins and his kind. Santiago Rodriguez, the former Border Patrol officer, was teaching Rose Martinez and some other young women how to reload ammunition quickly. The Carter brothers were setting up shooting positions around the property, while Miller and his sons reinforced the barn walls with extra timber. Hawkins won't come at us straight on, Tom explained, spreading a crude map across a hay bale. Not after what happened to Snake Eyes. He'll try to wear us down, maybe cut off our supplies from town first. Sarah nodded, her trained eye noting the vulnerable approaches to her property. He'll want to make an example of us. That means he'll target the town too, trying to turn the people against us. Already started, Santiago confirmed grimly. Heard from Emma that some merchants are getting nervous. Talk about leaving before trouble comes. Sarah's hand tightened on her gun belt. Then we need to show them that staying and fighting is their only real choice. Hawkins doesn't leave witnesses and he doesn't leave towns standing. They run now. They'll just die tired. The barn door opened, admitting Dr. Fuller with his medical bag. "Brought everything I could spare," he announced, setting up a small field hospital in one corner. "But Sarah, there's something else you should—" No, Sheriff Clayton received a telegram from the Territorial Marshal's office. They can't send help. Apparently, someone's been intercepting their patrols. "Hawkins has friends in high places," Tom growled. "Always has. That's how he stayed." Ahead of the law this long, Sarah walked to the barn door, looking out over the land she and James had chosen for their home. The setting sun painted the mountains gold and purple, a beautiful sight that belied the gathering storm. In the distance, she could see dust rising from the road, more riders approaching. "Then we do this ourselves," she declared, her voice carrying the steel that had made her famous in another life. "Tom, get everyone ready. Tomorrow, we will show Pine Valley what it means to stand and fight." The Carter brothers exchanged grins, checking their weapons. Miller's eldest son began distributing extra ammunition. Santiago crossed himself quietly before reviewing the defensive positions one more time. They were outnumbered and probably outgunned, but they had something Hawkins' men lacked, a cause worth dying for. In town, Emma Thompson closed her store early, hiding extra supplies in her cellar where they could be distributed if Hawkins tried to lay siege. Rose Martinez rode between outlying farms, carrying messages and gathering intelligence. And in his office, Sheriff Clayton finally pinned his badge on straight, loading his revolver with steady hands for the first time in months. The war for Pine Valley was about to begin, and its unlikely champion was a widow who had traded her competition medals for a chance at justice. As night fell, Sarah Morrison cleaned her guns by lamplight, remembering James's last words. Sometimes the best protection is being underestimated. Tomorrow, Hawkins would learn just how fatal that underestimation could be. Dawn broke over Pine Valley with an unnatural quiet. The usual morning bustle of the small Montana town was replaced by tense anticipation as armed men took up positions in doorways and behind water troughs. Sarah Morrison rode down the main street, her black dress replaced by practical riding clothes, the silver medal still gleaming at her throat. Townspeople watched from behind curtained windows as she passed, their expressions a mixture of hope and fear. At the general store, Emma Thompson was organizing supplies with military precision. "Hawkins' men were seen at Webster's Creek last night," she reported as Sarah dismounted. "At least 30 riders, and Charlie the Ghost Matthews. We're scouting our defenses again. That man can slip through shadows like a ghost." "Let him look," Sarah replied, checking the ammunition Emma had gathered. "Sometimes the best trap is the one your enemy can see clearly." She nodded to Santiago Rodriguez, who was positioned on the store's roof with a rifle, his dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Sheriff Clayton emerged from his office, looking more like his old self than he had in months. "Got word from Sweetwater," he announced, joining them at the store's entrance. "Hawkins hasn't just called in the Blackwater gang. He's hired every gun hand and border rat between here and Mexico. They're offering double rates for anyone willing to ride against us." Tom Baker spat into the dust. "Hired guns are cheap courage. They'll run when the shooting starts." The old ranch hand had positioned the Carter brothers at key points around town, their reputation as marksmen already, deterring some of Hawkins' scouts from getting too close. "Some will run," Sarah agreed, "but not all. The Turner twins won't break, and neither will that former colonel and his Mexican raiders. Those are the ones we need to worry about." She'd faced Daniel Turner once in a shooting competition in St. Louis. His speed and accuracy had nearly matched her own. Dr. Fuller arrived in his wagon, loaded with medical supplies. "I've set up a field hospital in the church basement," he reported. "Rose Martinez and 3 other women have volunteered as nurses. They're young, but they're steady under pressure." The morning progressed with methodical preparation. Miller and his sons had rigged several buildings with defensive positions, while Santiago's experience with the Border Patrol helped them identify likely attack routes. Sarah walked the town's perimeter with Tom, noting changes since her last patrol. "They'll come from the north," Tom predicted, pointing to the sparse tree line. "That ridge gives them cover almost to the edge of town. Hawkins may be mad, but he's not stupid. He'll want every advantage." Sarah studied the terrain, remembering the shooting competitions where she'd had to calculate wind, distance, and bullet drop in seconds. "The ridge is obvious, which means we can use it against them. How many dynamite charges do we have left?" 6 bundles, Tom replied. "Santiago knows how to place them for maximum effect. Used to hunt raiders along the border that way." Their planning was interrupted by the rapid approach of a rider, one of Miller's youngest sons, his horse lathered with sweat. "They're coming," he shouted, reining in hard. "Hawkins' advance force, at least 20 men heading for Webster's Creek." Sarah's voice cut through the growing tension. "Everyone to their positions. Remember, let them think they have the advantage until they're fully committed." She turned to Emma. "Get word to the families. Once the shooting starts, no one moves from their shelter until they hear the all clear." The town seemed to hold its breath as defenders moved into position. Sarah took her place on the hotel's second floor, where she had clear lines of sight to both main approaches. Through her rifle scope, she could see dust rising from Webster's Creek, the first wave of Hawkins' army approaching. "Santiago," she called softly to the former border officer on the neighboring roof. "When they hit the first charges, that's when they'll break formation. Pick your targets carefully. Go for the leaders first." Emma appeared at Sarah's side, with extra ammunition and a canteen. Rose spotted Charlie Matthews trying to slip through the back alleys. "The Carter brothers are tracking him. He won't be ghosting through our defenses this time." Sarah nodded, making minute adjustments to her rifle's sight. The coming battle would test not just their shooting skills, but their will to survive. She thought of James, of the life they'd planned to build here, of all the honest people in Pine Valley who deserved better than living under Hawkins's shadow. The dust cloud grew larger, and through her scope, Sarah could make out riders forming into attack lines. The Turner twins would be among them, probably leading the first wave. They were too experienced to fall for simple traps, which meant the real challenge would be drawing them into a position where their skill wouldn't matter. "Here they come," Tom's voice carried quietly across the rooftops. "God help us all." Sarah's finger rested lightly on her rifle's trigger, her breathing steady and controlled, just as it had been in countless competitions. But this was no competition. Lives hung in the balance, and Pine Valley's future would be decided in the next few hours. "No," she whispered, James's silver medal cool against her throat. "God help them. They're the ones who'll need it." The morning sun climbed higher as Hawkins's men approached, unaware that the quiet town ahead of them had become an armed camp, its defenders prepared to teach them the deadly cost of underestimating a widow's resolve. The war for Pine Valley was about to begin in earnest, and its opening shots would shake the Montana territory to its core. The first shot came, not with a bang, but with an explosion that shattered the morning calm. Santiago's carefully placed dynamite turned the ridge approach into a death trap, sending horses and riders tumbling in a chaos of dust and debris. Sarah's rifle cracked in the aftermath, finding 2 targets before the dust had settled. The battle for Pine Valley had begun. "They're splitting up," Tom Baker shouted from his position. The old ranch hand's warning proved accurate as Hawkins's men divided into smaller groups, seeking cover wherever they could find it. The Turner twins had survived the initial blast, their tactical experience showing as they directed their men to protected positions. Sarah tracked Daniel Turner through her scope, admiring his professional approach, even as she sought a clean shot. "Santiago, West Alley, they're trying to flank us." Her words were punctuated by the sharp report of Santiago's rifle, followed by a cry cut short. Emma Thompson moved efficiently between positions, distributing ammunition and relaying messages. "Charlie Matthews slipped through our eastern perimeter," she reported, crouching beside Sarah. "The Carter brothers are in pursuit, but he's living up to his nickname." "Let him ghost around all he wants," Sarah replied, her voice cold as steel. "This town's got enough secrets to bury him in." She'd prepared for Matthew's infiltration attempts, setting up false defensive positions that would lead him exactly where they wanted him. The morning dissolved into a symphony of gunfire and shouted orders. Hawkins' men pressed their attack with professional determination, but Pine Valley's defenders held firm. The Miller boys proved their worth, their coordinated fire keeping the attackers from establishing any solid footing in the town proper. From his position in the church tower, Sheriff Clayton watched a group of raiders attempting to circle behind the general store. "Mrs. Morrison," he called out. "They're heading for the supply cache." Sarah had already seen them. Her rifle spoke twice more, and 2 raiders fell from their saddles. The others scattered, but the message was clear. Every approach to Pine Valley had been mapped and covered by deadly accurate fire. "Samuel Turner's leading a charge down Main Street," Santiago's warning carried across the rooftops. The younger Turner twin had gathered about 10 riders, using a wagon for mobile cover as they advanced. Sarah's mind raced through competition scenarios, moving targets, multiple threats, limited ammunition. Tom, Miller boys, concentrated. "Fire on the wagon wheels. Santiago, Rose, wait for my signal." She adjusted her position, timing her shots with practiced precision. The wagon's left wheel exploded under coordinated rifle fire, sending the makeshift shield into a spin. As the riders scattered from behind it, Sarah and her sharpshooters picked them off with mechanical efficiency. Samuel Turner alone managed to dive for cover behind a water trough, his hat shot clean off his head. "That's the kind of shooting that won St. Louis," Samuel called out, a professional's admiration in his voice. "Come on, Sharp Eye. Give a man a chance to earn his pay." Sarah's response was another shot that splintered the water trough inches from his face. "You earned your pay when you signed with Hawkins. Now you'll earn your funeral." The battle shifted as the morning wore on. Charlie Matthews had indeed infiltrated the town, but his search for weaknesses in their defense led him straight into a crossfire between the Carter brothers. The notorious Ghost fell without ever seeing who sent him to the afterlife. Dr. Fuller worked tirelessly in his makeshift hospital, treating the few wounds their side had sustained. "They're pulling back," he reported during a brief lull. "Lost at least 15 men by my count." But Sarah knew better than to celebrate. "This was just their first push," she said, reloading her rifle with practiced moves. "Hawkins is testing our defenses, learning our positions. The real attack is yet to come." Her words proved prophetic as new dust clouds appeared on the horizon. The Mexican raiders had arrived, led by their former colonel, a man known only as El Cuervo, the Raven. His reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his brutality. "Here comes the second act," Tom muttered, distributing fresh ammunition. "These won't break as easy as the first bunch." Sarah watched through her scope as El Cuervo deployed his men with military precision. The former colonel had brought at least 30 riders, all veterans of countless border raids. They moved like a well-oiled machine, taking positions that would support their next assault. "Emma," Sarah called softly. "Get word to Santiago. Tell him to hold the rest of the dynamite. We'll need it when Hawkins himself shows up." She had no doubt the gang leader was watching from somewhere, waiting to see how his hired guns fared against Pine Valley's defenders. The sun climbed toward noon as both sides regrouped. Bodies littered the approaches to town, while wounded raiders crawled back toward their lines. Samuel Turner had finally managed to retreat, leaving his dead men behind. The first round had gone to Pine Valley, but Sarah could read the battlefield well enough to know their advantage wouldn't last. "They're setting up something in the tree line," Rose Martinez reported, her young eyes sharp. "Looks like some kind of heavy weapon." Sarah's blood ran cold as she spotted what the girl had seen. "Mountain howitzer," she breathed. "El Cuervo's brought artillery." The small cannon would change the entire dynamic of the battle. Their carefully prepared defensive positions wouldn't mean much against explosive shells. "Tom," she called out, her mind already formulating a new strategy. "Get everyone to the fallback positions. They're about to remind us what real war feels like." The old ranch hand nodded grimly. remembering similar situations from his cavalry days. The quiet before the second attack stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Sarah touched the silver medal at her throat, thinking of James and all they had dreamed of building here. "I won't let them take it," she whispered to his memory. "Not 1 inch of this town belongs to their kind." In the distance, El Cuervo raised his saber, signaling the beginning of the second assault. The real battle for Pine Valley was about to begin, and this time, mere accuracy might not be enough to save them. The first shell from El Cuervo's mountain howitzer screamed over Pine Valley like a banshee's wail, exploding against the roof of the general store. Splinters and debris rained down as defenders scrambled for better cover. Sarah Morrison's mind raced through calculations: trajectory, reload time, effective range, all the things James had taught her about artillery during his time in the war. "Everyone to the west side positions," she commanded, her voice carrying over the chaos. "That cannon's got a limited firing arc. We need to stay in its blind spots." The defenders moved with practiced coordination, falling back to pre-arranged positions that offered protection from both gunfire and artillery. El Cuervo's men advanced behind the artillery barrage, using the confusion to gain ground. The former colonel sat astride his black stallion, directing his forces with the precision that had made him legendary on both sides of the border. Another shell exploded, this time taking out part of the livery stable. "Sarah," Emma called out urgently. "The hospital. They're targeting the church." Dr. Fuller and his makeshift medical station were still in the church basement, along with their wounded. Sarah's jaw tightened as she realized El Cuervo's strategy. He was systematically destroying their fallback positions. "Santiago, Tom, get those people out through the tunnels," she ordered. "Rose, take the Carter brothers and give them covering fire from the south. Make every shot count. We're running low on rifle ammunition." The next few minutes were a blur of coordinated movement as they evacuated the wounded. El Cuervo's men pressed their advantage, but Sarah's defenders made them pay for every foot of ground. The Miller boys proved especially effective, their knowledge of the town's layout allowing them to appear and disappear like ghosts, picking off raiders who got too confident. "They're pushing us toward the center," Tom observed between shots. The old ranch hand's tactical experience recognized the pattern. "Trying to bunch us up for that cannon," Sarah nodded grimly. "That's not their only play. Look there." She pointed to movement along the eastern edge of town. Daniel Turner had reappeared with a fresh group of riders, working their way through the back alleys. "They're trying to cut off our escape routes." A shell landed closer this time, showering them with dirt and debris. Through the settling dust, Sarah caught glimpses of more riders approaching from the north. The Blackwater gang had finally arrived, adding their numbers to El Cuervo's. "Assault!" "Mrs. Morrison," Sheriff Clayton called out, clutching his bleeding arm where a splinter had caught him. "We're almost out of options here. That cannon's going to tear this town apart piece by piece." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. They were outnumbered at least 4-1 now, with more of Hawkins's men arriving by the hour. The artillery had negated their careful preparations, and ammunition was running dangerously low. But as she watched El Cuervo repositioning his howitzer, a dangerous plan began to form. "Emma," she called softly, "get me Santiago and the last of the dynamite. And find Rose. I need to know exactly where that ghost Matthews was heading before the Carter brothers got him." Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. "The old silver mine tunnels. Matthews must have found the entrance behind the church." The network of abandoned mining tunnels ran beneath much of the town, a fact they'd kept carefully hidden from Hawkins's scouts. "Tom," Sarah continued, her voice taking on the same tone she'd used in shooting competitions when everything rode on one final shot. "Remember those cavalry charges you told me about? The ones where you'd bait a superior force into a trap?" The old ranch hand's weathered face broke into a fierce grin. "Yes, ma'am, I surely do. Learned that trick from the Confederates at Shiloh. Lost a lot of good men before we figured out what they were doing." Sarah laid out her plan quickly as another. "Shell rocked the town. It was dangerous, maybe even suicide. but it was their only chance to neutralize that cannon. Santiago would lead a small team through the tunnels, using Matthew's discovered route to circle behind El Cuervo's position. Meanwhile, Sarah and the others would make a desperate-looking retreat toward the north end of town. "They'll think we're running," she explained, checking her ammunition. "El Cuervo will want to get that howitzer closer for a better shot at our escape. That's when Santiago's team hits them from behind with the dynamite." "It's a good plan," Tom admitted, "except for one thing. Those tunnels are old and unstable. One stray shell could bring the whole system down. Then we'll have to make sure they're too busy shooting at us to waste shells on the ground," Sarah replied. She touched the silver medal at her throat, remembering James's lessons about calculated risks. Sometimes, survival meant betting everything on one perfect shot. Rose Martinez appeared at Sarah's side, her young face streaked with dirt, but her eyes bright with determination. "The tunnel entrance is clear, and I know which branches Matthews was mapping. I can guide Santiago's team." Sarah gripped the girl's shoulder. "No, I need you here. You're the best shot among the younger folks. The Miller boys listen to you. Keep them coordinated while we draw their fire." El Cuervo's artillery fired again, the shell landing close enough to shower them with splinters. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see the former colonel studying their positions, probably wondering why they hadn't completely broken yet. She allowed herself a grim smile. Soon he would learn what James had always said: "The deadliest shot is the one you never see coming." "Send word to everyone," she commanded. "We start falling back in stages, making it look real but not too." "Easy. Santiago, you'll have 10 minutes to get into position once we begin." The former border officer nodded, gathering his chosen men and their precious cargo of dynamite. As the defenders prepared for their desperate gambit, Sarah took one last look at Pine Valley's battered streets. Everything they'd built, everything they'd dreamed of, now rode on perfect timing and a handful of explosives. The next few minutes would determine not just their survival, but the future of the entire territory. "James," she whispered, chambering a round in her rifle, "I could use a little of your luck right about now." The fake retreat began with a series of carefully orchestrated withdrawals. Sarah Morrison led her defenders north, making their movements appear desperate, but not panicked. El Cuervo watched from his command position, his military experience making him suspicious of such an orderly retreat. But the lure of trapping his opponents proved too tempting to resist. "They're taking the bait," Tom Baker muttered, ducking behind a partially collapsed wall as another shell whistled overhead. "El Cuervo's moving the howitzer forward just like you predicted." Sarah tracked the cannon's movement through her scope, counting the seconds between shots. The artillery crew was good. Professional soldiers, not bandits playing at war. They maintained perfect spacing and timing, each man knowing his role in the deadly dance. Emma Thompson appeared at Sarah's side, her dress covered in dust and powder burns. Santiago's team is in position. They found Matthews's mapped route and added their own surprises. She handed Sarah a small mirror for signaling. "Rose has the Miller boys ready on the south side." The artillery fired again, the shell landing closer as El Cuervo's men adjusted their range. Sarah could see Daniel Turner leading a flanking movement, trying to cut off their escape route. The timing would have to be perfect. Too soon, and they'd lose the element of surprise. Too late, and they'd lose their chance completely. "Tell everyone to hold steady," Sarah commanded. "Wait for my signal, then make it look real." She touched James's medal, drawing strength from the memories. It carried. In competitions, she'd learned that the difference between victory and defeat often came down to patience, waiting for exactly the right moment to take the shot. El Cuervo raised his saber, signaling another advance. His men moved forward in disciplined waves, covering each other with well-aimed fire. The howitzer crew began hitching their horses, preparing to move the cannon to a better firing position. "Now!" Sarah's voice cut through the gunfire. Her defenders began their final withdrawal, making a show of panicked shooting and rushed movement. Some even left equipment behind, adding to the illusion of a force on the verge of breaking. The ruse worked perfectly. El Cuervo urged his men forward, sensing victory. The howitzer crew rushed to reposition their weapon, eager to deliver the killing blow to Pine Valley's resistance. In their haste, they missed the subtle signs of disturbed earth around their new position. Sarah caught a glint of sunlight, Santiago's signal that his team was ready. She raised her rifle, aiming not at the artillery crew, but at a specific point just behind the cannon. The shot had to be perfect and had to draw every eye at exactly the right moment. Her rifle cracked once, the bullet kicking up dust mere inches from El Cuervo's horse. The former colonel instinctively turned toward the shot, his attention momentarily drawn away from his precious howitzer. That moment of distraction was all Santiago needed. The explosion seemed to come from the earth itself. Santiago's team had planted their dynamite in a semicircle around the cannon's new position, using the old mining tunnels to get exactly where they needed to be. The combined blast threw men and horses into the air, turning the howitzer into twisted scrap metal. "Now!" Sarah shouted. "Everyone hit them hard!" Her defenders suddenly reversed direction, their seemingly panicked retreat transforming into a coordinated assault. The Miller boys and Rose Martinez opened up from their hidden positions, catching El Cuervo's men in a devastating crossfire. The former colonel struggled to restore order, but the loss of his artillery had shattered his men's confidence. They began falling back in disarray, their disciplined lines dissolving into chaos. Daniel Turner tried to organize a counterattack, but precise shots from Sarah and Tom kept his men pinned down. "They're breaking!" Sheriff Clayton called out, his voice strong despite his wounds. "Push them back!" The defenders pressed their advantage, moving from cover to cover with practiced coordination. Emma and Dr. Fuller's team began advancing behind, them retrieving dropped weapons and ammunition from fallen raiders. El Cuervo himself remained steady, rallying what men he could around him. "Hold your ground," he shouted in heavily accented English. "It's just one setback. We still have the numbers." But his words carried little weight now that his tactical advantage was gone. Sarah moved to a better position, her rifle finding targets with mechanical precision. Each shot dropped another of El Cuervo's officers, further disrupting his command structure. The few remaining raiders began to retreat in earnest, abandoning their wounded in their haste to escape. Through her scope, Sarah spotted Daniel Turner helping his brother Samuel onto a horse. The younger Turner caught her eye across the battlefield and offered a respectful nod before spurring his mount toward safety. Professional courtesy, even in defeat, it was something she could understand. El Cuervo was the last to retreat, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over, widow!" he shouted as he wheeled his horse around. "Hawkins will burn this town to the ground for this!" "Tell him to come himself next time," Sarah called back, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. "I'm tired of dealing with hired guns." As the dust settled, Pine Valley's defenders began assessing the damage. The town had been battered, but not broken. Santiago's team emerged from the tunnel entrance, grinning despite their powder-burned faces. They had lost good people, 3 defenders dead, several more wounded, but they had bloodied one of the territory's most feared military commanders. "They'll be back," Tom said quietly, joining Sarah as she surveyed the aftermath. "Hawkins won't take this lying down. He'll come with everything he has next time." Sarah nodded, reloading her rifle with practiced ease. "Good. I'm done fighting his proxies. It's time to finish this. Just Hawkins, his core gang, and us." She touched the silver medal at her throat. "James always said that a cornered mountain lion is the most dangerous kind. Well, they've cornered us in our home. Let's show them how dangerous that can be." The sun began to set over Pine Valley, painting the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah Morrison stood among her people, knowing that their victory today had only guaranteed them a bigger fight tomorrow. But as she watched Emma organizing repairs, Rose tending to the wounded, and the Miller boys collecting dropped weapons, She saw something that Hawkins and his kind would never understand: the strength of people fighting for their home. The real battle was still to come, but they would face it together, defenders of a town that refused to be broken by men who mistook violence for strength. And at their heart stood a widow who had traded competition glory for a different kind of victory: the right to live free from fear. Night fell over Pine Valley like a heavy blanket, bringing with it an uneasy quiet. The defenders worked by lamplight, repairing what damage they could, and fortifying their positions for the battle they knew was coming. Sarah Morrison stood in the ruins of the general store, helping Emma Thompson salvage what supplies remained after the artillery bombardment. "Word's spreading fast," Emma reported, sorting through undamaged ammunition boxes. "3 riders came through Sweetwater telling stories about how we broke El Cuervo's army. They're calling you the Widow's Justice now." She paused, studying her friend's face. "The legend's growing, Sarah." "Legends won't stop Hawkins," Sarah replied, though she understood the value of reputation in this territory. "How are we doing on ammunition?" "Better than we might be," Tom Baker interrupted, entering with Santiago Rodriguez. "Found plenty among the dead raiders. And that cannon crew had a wagon full of rifle rounds. Seems El Cuervo was planning for a longer siege." Dr. Fuller appeared from the direction of his makeshift hospital, his sleeves stained with blood, but his expression satisfied. "All our wounded are stable. Lost Jenkins and young Cooper, though. Their families are with them now." Sarah's face tightened at the news. 2 more deaths to lay at Hawkins's feet. She'd known both men. Cooper had been barely 20, with a young wife expecting their first child. "Make sure their families are taken care of," she instructed Emma. "Whatever they need." Rose Martinez burst in, her young face flushed with excitement. "Riders coming from the south, but it's not raiders, it's help." The girl's eyes shone with hope. "The Carter brothers' cousin runs the Triple B ranch. He heard about our stand against El Cuervo and brought 20 men, all armed." Sheriff Clayton limped over from his post, his wounded arm in a sling but his badge polished and straight. "That's not all. Got word from the settlement at Copper Creek. They're sending supplies and men, too. Seems folks are tired of living under Hawkins' shadow." Sarah moved to the window, watching as the new arrivals were guided into town. Fresh horses, fresh guns, fresh fighters, all drawn by the story of a widow who dared to stand against the territory's most feared outlaws. But with them came wagon loads of women and children, families seeking shelter behind Pine Valley's growing reputation. "We can't protect them all," Tom said quietly, reading her concern. "More people means more targets, more mouths to feed, more positions to defend. We protect everyone." Sarah's voice was firm. "That's what separates us from Hawkins and his kind." She touched the silver medal at her throat, remembering James's words about building something worth defending. "Santiago, work with the Miller boys. Expand our defensive positions to cover the south end of town. Emma, see to the new families, find them safe shelter." Dr. Fuller cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. One of El Cuervo's wounded talked before he died. Hawkins isn't just gathering men anymore, he's bringing in heavy weapons. Apparently that mountain howitzer was just the beginning." "Makes sense," Tom nodded grimly. "Man like that being humiliated twice, he'll want to make sure the 3rd time sticks." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. More artillery would change everything. Their defenses, their tactics, their very chances of survival. But artillery needed roads, needed time to set up, needed crews to operate. Every weapon had its weakness. James had taught her that. "Rose," she called to the young woman, "find those maps Matthews was carrying when the Carter brothers got him. That ghost might have been hunting our weaknesses, but he probably found Hawkins too." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. New defenders were integrated into their positions, families were settled into the most protected buildings, and supplies were distributed with careful precision. Through it all, Sarah moved like a shadow, checking defenses, encouraging the weary, making sure every person knew their role in what was to come. Near midnight, she found herself in the church tower with Emma, studying the starlit landscape. In the distance, campfires dotted the hills, not all of them friendly. Hawkins was gathering his forces, preparing for what would surely be his final assault on Pine Valley. "Did I ever tell you how James and I met?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice soft in the darkness. "Everyone assumes it was at a shooting competition, but it wasn't. I found him practicing at dawn behind the St. Louis Fairgrounds, day before the big match. He'd been there for hours, working on this one difficult shot." Emma listened quietly, understanding that her friend needed to share this memory. "I watched him miss it again and again, but he never got frustrated, never gave up, just kept adjusting, learning from each mistake. When he finally noticed me, you know what he said? Sometimes the target isn't what it seems. You have to look past what's right in front of you to see the real shot." Sarah's hand touched her rifle, its wood smooth from years of use. He was right. Wasn't until the next day I realized he'd been practicing that shot specifically to beat me. He'd studied my competition style, knew exactly what would give me trouble. That's when I knew he was different from all the other shooters. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to understand. "Like you're doing now," Emma observed, looking past the obvious threat to see the real target. Sarah nodded slowly. "Hawkins thinks this is about territory, about power. He's gathering armies and artillery to crush a physical enemy. But this fight," she touched the silver medal, "this fight is about something he'll never understand." Below them, Pine Valley stirred with quiet purpose as its people prepared for the coming storm. They were no longer just townspeople. They had become warriors, defenders, united by something stronger than fear. Sarah watched them work, feeling a fierce pride in their transformation. "Get some rest," she told Emma. "Tomorrow we start planning the end of this war. One way or another, Hawkins is going to learn what it means to underestimate people fighting for their home." The night deepened. But few in Pine Valley slept. They had won 2 battles, but the real test was still to come. And somewhere out there, Wild Bill Hawkins was preparing to teach them all a bloody lesson about defiance. Dawn broke over Pine Valley with an unnatural red sky, as if the heavens themselves were warning of blood to come. Sarah Morrison studied. The Dead Ghosts maps spread across a table in the sheriff's office, her trained eye picking out details others might miss. Charlie Matthews had been thorough in his reconnaissance. Every cave, gulch, and hidden trail around Pine Valley had been carefully noted. "Found something," Santiago Rodriguez announced, pointing to a marked trail that wound through the canyonlands. "This route here, it's perfect for moving heavy weapons without being seen. Comes right up behind Devil's Ridge." Tom Baker leaned in, his weathered face grim. "That's where I'd put artillery if I was planning to reduce a town to rubble. High ground, good cover, clear lines of fire." The old cavalrymen had seen enough bombardments to know the devastating potential. "Then that's where Hawkins will be," Sarah concluded, her finger tracing the route. "He's learned from El Cuervo's mistake. He won't bring his guns in close where we can get at them." She straightened up, touching the silver medal at her throat. "He'll try to break us from a distance." Sheriff Clayton entered, followed by Emma Thompson and Rose Martinez. "Scouts report movement to the north and east," the lawman announced. "Big groups moving under cover, and they've got wagons, lots of them." "More artillery," Tom growled. "Man's not taking any chances this time." Sarah studied the map again, her mind racing through possibilities. James had taught her about artillery during the war, its strengths and weaknesses, the complex mathematics of trajectory and timing. "How many men can you spare from the town defense?" she asked Tom. "The old ranch hand is considered." "Maybe 10 if we're careful. The new volunteers from Triple B know their business, and the Miller boys can cover more ground now that we've got proper firing positions set up." "I'll go," Rose volunteered immediately. "I'm small, quick, and I know these hills better than most." The young woman had proven her worth repeatedly over the past days, her courage matching her skill. Sarah nodded slowly, a plan forming. "Santiago, you said there are old mining tunnels that run out toward Devil's Ridge," the former border officer confirmed, pointing out several tunnel entrances on Matthew's map. "They're dangerous," he warned. "Could cave in any time. That's why the mining company abandoned them 20 years ago." "Sometimes the most dangerous path is the only one worth taking," Sarah replied, remembering James's words about calculated risks. "We can't let those guns get set up. Once they start firing, this town won't stand a chance." Emma understood immediately. "You're going after the artillery before they can position it." It wasn't a question. She knew her friend well enough to read the determination in her eyes. "Not just the artillery," Sarah corrected. "Hawkins will be there, supervising personally. He won't trust anyone else after 2 failures. This is our chance to end it. Cut the head off the snake before it can strike." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They all knew what she was proposing, a desperate raid against a superior force, deep in enemy territory. The odds of success were slim, and the price of failure would be catastrophic. "I don't like it," Tom said finally. "Too many things can go wrong. Those tunnels could collapse. The enemy could be waiting for us. We could get cut off from retreat." He paused, then smiled grimly. "But it's exactly what I'd have done in my cavalry days." "Count me in." Santiago nodded. "The tunnels were my idea. I go too. I'll handpick 3 men who know how to move quietly." 4, Rose insisted. "You need someone who can slip through small spaces if the tunnels get tight. And I'm the best shot among the younger folks." Her chin lifted defiantly, daring anyone to contradict her. Sarah studied the young woman, seeing in her the same fire that had driven her own competitive spirit years ago. 5 then, she decided. "A small team, moving fast and quiet. We hit them before they know we're there." Dr. Fuller appeared in the doorway, his medical bag in hand. "Whatever you're planning, you'll need someone who can patch you up." The old doctor's voice brooked no argument. "I've sat on the sidelines long enough." "No," Sarah countered. "You're needed here. If we fail—" She let the words hang in the air. Everyone knew what would follow their failure. Hawkins would show no mercy to Pine Valley. Emma stepped forward. "I'll get the supplies ready. Medicine, ammunition, food, everything you'll need for a fast raid." Her efficient mind was already cataloging requirements. "How long will you be gone?" Sarah traced the route on the map. 2 hours through the tunnels, if they're still passable. Another hour to get into position. We have to hit them at dusk. That's when they'll be busy setting up their guns, less likely to spot us approaching. Sheriff Clayton straightened his badge. "I'll keep the town's defenses strong. Make it look like we're expecting a frontal assault. Might buy you some extra time." The planning continued as the sun climbed higher. Every detail was checked and rechecked, every contingency considered. Sarah knew they would only get one chance at this. Failure meant not just their deaths, but the destruction of everything and everyone they sought to protect. As the others left to make preparations, Emma caught Sarah's arm. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling them." Sarah touched her silver medal, James's last gift. "Hawkins was there that day," she said quietly. "When James was bitten by the rattler, he rode past our ranch, heard us calling for help. He looked right at us, tipped his hat, and rode on." Her voice hardened. "He could have fetched the doctor, could have helped. Instead, he left us to fate." Emma understood then. This wasn't just about protecting Pine Valley. For Sarah Morrison, this was about balancing accounts long overdue. The widow's justice was about to become something more personal, more deadly than even Hawkins could imagine. The Red Dawn had promised blood. By sunset, that promise would be kept, one way or another. The old mining tunnels breathed like a living thing, exhaling stale air and decades of dust, as Sarah Morrison led her small team through the darkness. Their lanterns were dimmed to mere glows, casting weird shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The support beams creaked ominously overhead, a constant reminder of the tons of rock and earth pressing down around them. "Another cave-in ahead," Santiago whispered, his experience with border tunnel rats proving invaluable. "Recent too, probably from the artillery bombardment." He pointed to a narrow gap above the fallen rocks. "We can squeeze through there, but it'll be tight." Rose Martinez went first, her small frame easily navigating the gap. She helped guide the others through, her quiet confidence keeping them moving despite the claustrophobic conditions. Tom Baker came last, his old joints protesting, but his determination never wavering. "According to Matthew's map, we should be about halfway to Devil's Ridge," Sarah calculated, checking their progress. The Ghost's detailed reconnaissance was proving accurate. Every fork and passage had been exactly where he'd marked it. A distant rumble shook loose fragments of rock from the ceiling. "That's not natural," Tom muttered, his cavalry experience recognizing the sound. "They're test-firing the artillery, ranging their shots." "Good," Sarah replied grimly. "Means they haven't finished setting up all their guns yet. We still have time, but not much." Hawkins would want to begin his bombardment at first light tomorrow. The team pressed on, each step taking them closer to their target. Sarah had chosen them carefully. Santiago for his tunnel expertise, Tom for his tactical knowledge, Rose for her speed and accuracy, and two of the most experienced Triple B ranch hands for their steady nerves. The tunnels grew narrower as they progressed, forcing them to move single file. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and the air grew thicker with mineral dust. Every few minutes, they would pause to listen for movement above. Hawkins had patrols everywhere, and sound carried strangely through the rock. "Sarah," Rose called softly from her forward position. "There's something ahead. Looks like an old mining cart track." The rusted rails led upward at a steep angle, disappearing into the gloom. Santiago studied the tunnel ceiling carefully. "This shaft should come out behind Devil's Ridge, maybe half a mile from where they'll place the artillery. It's our best chance to surface undetected." Another rumble shook the tunnel. Closer this time. Dust and small rocks rained down, forcing them to cover their lanterns. When the shaking stopped, Tom's face was grim. That was closer to town. They're already starting to bracket their targets. Sarah felt the weight of time pressing down as heavily as the rock above them. Every minute they spent in these tunnels was another minute Hawkins had to prepare his destruction of Pine Valley. She thought of Emma organizing the town's defenses, of Dr. Fuller preparing for casualties, of all the families who had sought shelter behind their walls. "We follow the track," she decided. "But from here on, no lights. Use the guide rope and stay close." They had practiced moving in darkness during their preparation, knowing the final approach would require absolute stealth. The climb was treacherous. The old track ties made for uncertain footing, and the grade was steep enough that a slip could send them tumbling back into the darkness. Sarah led by feel, her years of shooting competition having taught her to trust. Her other senses when visibility failed. Suddenly, Rose's hand grabbed Sarah's arm, stopping her. The girl's whisper was barely audible. Light ahead, natural light, and voices. The team froze, listening intently. Sure enough, fragments of conversation drifted down the shaft. Sarah could make out at least 3 distinct voices, and the occasional stamp of horses' hooves. They had found one of Hawkins' patrols. Moving with extreme care, Sarah crept forward until she could see a patch of evening sky through the partially collapsed tunnel mouth. 2 of Hawkins' men had dismounted near the entrance, sharing a smoke while their companions watched the surrounding terrain. "Biggest guns I've ever seen," one was saying. "The boss ain't taking no chances this time. By tomorrow night there won't be nothing left of Pine Valley except holes in the ground." "Shame about that widow, though," his companion replied. "Real pretty thing, from what I heard. Boss seems to have some kind of personal grudge there. After what she did to Snake, Eyes and El Cuervo ain't just personal no more. It's about reputation. Can't let some woman make fools of us and live to tell about it. Sarah felt rather than saw her team shifting into position behind her. They had practiced this too. Swift, silent takedowns when stealth was crucial. She caught Rose's eye in the dim light and nodded once. What happened next was over in seconds. Rose's knife found one sentry's throat while Santiago's garrote eliminated the second. The two Triple B hands dealt with the mounted lookouts before they could cry out. Tom Baker secured the horses, his experienced hands keeping them quiet despite the smell of blood. 4 less to deal with later, Santiago whispered, cleaning his garrote with professional detachment. But we need to move these bodies and horses. A missing patrol will raise alarms faster than a late one. There's a side tunnel back there, Rose reported. Looks like it collapsed years ago. We can seal them in, make it look like another cave-in. If anyone comes looking. They worked quickly, efficiently, leaving no trace of the brief violence. The evening light showed they had emerged exactly where Matthew's map indicated, a perfect position to approach the artillery encampment from its blind side. When they finished, Sarah gathered her team close. Remember, we're not here to fight an army. We find the guns, place the charges, and get clear. But Hawkins... Her hand touched the silver medal at her throat. Hawkins is mine. The sun was setting behind Devil's Ridge as the small team disappeared into the gathering shadows. Above them, unaware of the death moving silently toward their position, Hawkins's men continued preparing their instruments of destruction. The final act of Pine Valley's resistance was about to begin. Twilight painted Devil's Ridge in shades of purple and deep red as Sarah Morrison and her team crept toward Hawkins's position. The artillery encampment sprawled across the ridgeline, 6 heavy guns positioned for maximum effect, their black barrels aimed at Pine Valley like accusing fingers. Teams of men worked by lamplight, measuring distances and calculating trajectories. There's more hardware here than we expected, Tom whispered, counting equipment through his field glasses. Those 2 on the end, those are siege guns, military grade. Where'd Hawkins get his hands on those? Santiago's face darkened. El Cuervo's contacts, probably. There's been talk of missing shipments from federal arsenals. The former border officer pointed to several men moving with military precision. Those aren't just bandits, they're trained artillery crews. Sarah studied the layout, her competitive shooter's eye noting angles and distances. Hawkins had positioned his guns well. Overlapping fields of fire would let him systematically destroy Pine Valley piece by piece. But his attention to the technical details had left gaps in his security. Rose, she whispered, see that supply wagon? The one with the powder kegs? The young woman nodded. That's our target. One good shot when we're ready, and those guns become very expensive scrap metal. The girl's eyes gleamed with understanding. But we have to get the charges placed first. And find Hawkins. As if summoned by his name, Wild Bill Hawkins rode into the camp, flanked by the Turner twins. Sarah's hand tightened on her rifle as she got her first clear look at the man who had left James to die. He sat his horse with the same arrogant confidence she remembered, his scarred face illuminated by the camp's fires. "Status report!" Hawkins barked, dismounting near the largest gun. "I want these pieces ready to fire at first light." "Almost there, boss," Daniel Turner reported. "Another hour to fine-tune the trajectories. By sunrise, we can hit any building." "In Pine Valley, you want?" Hawkins grinned, the expression making his scar twist grotesquely. "Good. We start with the church. Make them watch it burn. Then the general store, the sheriff's office. Let them see everything they love turn to ash before we finish them." "Sir." A rider galloped into camp. "The North Patrol hasn't reported in. No sign of them at their last checkpoint." Sarah felt her team tense, but Hawkins merely shrugged. "Probably found a bottle somewhere. They'll turn up." He turned back to the guns, his attention focused on the instruments of destruction that would give him his revenge. "Now," Sarah breathed. "Rose, Santiago, take the left side. Tom, you and your men go right. Plant the charges where they'll do the most damage. but wait for my signal." Her voice hardened. "No matter what happens, those guns don't fire on Pine Valley. Understood?" They separated silently, each team carrying their share of the dynamite they'd brought through the tunnels. Sarah watched them disappear into the growing darkness, then began her own careful movement toward her true target. Hawkins had moved to a small command tent where maps and papers were spread across a wooden table. She could end it now, she knew. One clean shot from her current position would put a bullet through his brain. But that would be too quick, too merciful for a man who had watched James die with a tip of his hat and a casual ride away. A commotion from the far end of the camp drew her attention. One of the Triple B hands had been spotted, and shouts of alarm rang out across the ridge. Gunfire erupted as her team abandoned stealth for speed, racing to plant their remaining charges. "We're under attack." Samuel Turner's voice cut through the chaos. "Protect the guns!" Hawkins emerged from his tent, pistol drawn. "Find them! Every last one! No one threatens my operation and lives to tell about it." His face was twisted with rage as he began organizing his men into search parties. Sarah used the confusion to move closer, working her way through the shadows until she was barely 30 feet from her target. She could see Rose and Santiago finishing their work, using the distraction to place their charges undisturbed. Tom and his remaining man were somewhere on the other side, hopefully doing the same. A scream cut through the night as one of the Triple B hands was caught. Sarah watched in cold fury as Hawkins personally put a bullet through the captured man's head. "That's one," he shouted into the darkness. "Come on out, and I might let the rest of you die quick. Hide, and I promise you'll suffer." Sarah's blood ran cold as she saw Santiago get caught in the open, illuminated by a swinging lantern. The former border officer managed to drop 2 of Hawkins' men before a rifle shot took him in the leg. He fell hard but managed to roll behind some crates. "Well, well," Hawkins approached the wounded man, gun raised. "One of Clayton's deputies, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me where the others are, and I'll make it fast." Santiago spat a curse in Spanish, his hand inching toward his hidden knife. "Have it your way," Hawkins aimed carefully. "But first tell me, is she here? The widow? I owe her something special for what she did to my operation." "Right here, you bastard." Sarah's voice cut through the night like a whip crack. She stood in plain view, her rifle trained on Hawkins's heart. Around the camp, all motion ceased as everyone turned to look at the woman who had caused so much trouble. Hawkins turned slowly, his scarred face breaking into a cruel smile. "Sarah Williams," he said softly. "Or I suppose it's Morrison now. Been a long time since St. Louis." His gun remained pointed at Santiago. "You've cost me a lot of money and men, woman." "You cost me everything," Sarah replied, her voice steady as steel. "Remember James? Remember riding past our ranch that day, seeing him dying from that snake bite?" "Lots of people die out here," Hawkins shrugged. "Can't save everyone." The silver. Metal gleamed at Sarah's throat as she took a single step forward. "No, but you can choose to try, just like I'm choosing what happens next." The air grew thick with tension as 2 killers faced each other in the lamplight, surrounded by enough explosives to turn Devil's Ridge into a smoking crater. The final confrontation between the widow and the man who had helped kill her husband was about to begin. Time seemed to freeze on Devil's Ridge as Sarah Morrison and Wild Bill Hawkins faced each other in the lamplight. The artillery crews stood motionless, guns forgotten as they watched the confrontation unfold. Santiago lay bleeding behind his crates, his eyes moving between the 2 adversaries. "You know what's funny?" Hawkins said conversationally, his gun still trained on Santiago. "I actually remembered you the moment I heard about Snake Eyes getting killed. That fast draw, that accuracy, had to be Sharp Eye Sarah. Best shot in 3 territories." His scarred face twisted into a mock smile. "Till you gave it all up to play house with James Morrison." "Wasn't playing," Sarah replied, her rifle unwavering. "We were building something men like you wouldn't understand." Hawkins laughed, the sound echoing off the ridge walls. "Oh, I understand plenty. Understanding's what kept me alive, made me rich. For instance," his voice hardened, "I understand you're not alone. Got a whole team up here, planting charges on my precious artillery." He raised his voice. "Turner boys, find them." The twins moved to comply, but Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "They move. You die." The absolute certainty in her tone froze. "Everyone in place." "You won't shoot," Hawkins sneered. "Not while I've got a gun on your friend here. And even if you did, my men would cut you down before you could blink." His eyes narrowed. "So let's be reasonable. Surrender now. I'll make it quick. Fight, and I'll make you watch Pine Valley burn before I kill you." Sarah's finger tightened imperceptibly on her trigger. "You're right about one thing. I'm not alone." She raised her voice slightly. "Rose?" From somewhere in the darkness came a single rifle shot. The powder wagon exploded in a massive fireball, sending men and equipment flying. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. Santiago rolled behind better cover, drawing his hidden knife. Tom Baker and his remaining man opened fire from their positions, picking off artillery crews with deadly accuracy, and Sarah Morrison's rifle roared, sending a bullet through Hawkins' gun. Han. The gang leader screamed in pain and rage, his pistol flying into the darkness. "Kill her!" he bellowed, diving behind a gun carriage. "Kill them all!" The night erupted in gunfire. The Turner twins organized a response, their professional skill showing as they directed return fire toward the attackers' positions. But Sarah's team had chosen their spots well, and more importantly, had planted their charges during the previous distraction. "Now!" Sarah's command carried over the chaos. Multiple explosions rocked the ridge as charges detonated beneath the artillery pieces. Guns worth a fortune became twisted metal, their crews scattered or dead. Through the smoke and confusion, Sarah advanced steadily toward Hawkins' position, her rifle finding targets with mechanical precision. "It's over, Bill!" she called out, dropping Samuel Turner with a shot to the shoulder. "Your guns are gone. Your men are dying. Come out and face me." "Never." Hawkins' voice was thick with hatred. He had found another weapon and fired blindly, in her direction. "I'll see you in hell first." Sarah's response was coldly practical. "You first." She put a bullet through the gun carriage's wheel, sending it crashing down. Hawkins sprawled into the open, exposed in the firelight. He came up shooting with his offhand, but Sarah was already moving. Their final shots rang out simultaneously. Hawkins's bullet cut through her sleeve, drawing blood. Sarah's shot took him high in the chest, spinning him around. But Wild Bill Hawkins hadn't survived this long by being easy to kill. Even wounded, he charged toward her with a knife drawn. Sarah dropped her empty rifle and drew her revolver, James's last gift, in one smooth motion. "This is for James," she said softly, and fired. Hawkins took 2 more steps before reality caught up with his body. He looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, then back at Sarah with something like surprise. "Didn't think. A woman," he managed, before toppling forward into the dust of Devil's Ridge. The remaining battle didn't last long. With their leader dead and their artillery destroyed, most of Hawkins' men surrendered. The Turner twins made a final stand, but fell to Tom Baker's expert shooting, Daniel dead, Samuel badly wounded but alive. Dawn broke over Pine Valley to find Sarah Morrison standing in the wreckage of Hawkins' camp, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Santiago's leg had been bandaged, and though they had lost one of the Triple B hands, the rest of her team had survived. "Town safe," Tom reported, cleaning his rifle with practiced care. "Sheriff Clayton's already riding up with a wagon for the prisoners. Rose is bringing Dr. Fuller for the wounded." Sarah touched the silver medal at her throat one last time, then slowly removed it. "It's finished, James," she whispered. "We can rest now." In the months that followed, Pine Valley flourished. The story of the widow who brought down Wild Bill Hawkins spread throughout the territory, becoming the kind of legend that mothers told their daughters, a reminder that strength came in many forms. Sarah Morrison remained in town, teaching young Rose Martinez and others the skills that had made her famous. But she never again wore the silver medal. Instead, it hung in Emma Thompson's store, beside a collection of newspaper clippings about Sharp-Eye Sarah and the Battle of Devils Ridge. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on her porch and watch the sun set behind the mountains. The town had changed, grown stronger through its trial by fire. New families arrived, drawn by Pine Valley's reputation as a place where justice meant more than just a marshal's badge, and if anyone riding through happened to cause trouble, they quickly learned what Hawkins had discovered too late, that underestimating a widow with a gun was the last mistake they'd ever make. Sheriff Clayton kept Hawkins's gun belt mounted behind his desk, a reminder that courage could be found in unexpected places. But the true memorial to Pine Valley's victory wasn't in weapons or wanted posters. It was in the peace that followed, in the laughter of children playing without fear, in the simple right of people to live free from tyranny. Sarah Morrison had traded competition glory for something far more precious, a home worth defending, and the strength to protect it. In the end, that was all James had ever wanted for them, and in the end, that was what his widow had won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who called Pine Valley home. The legend of the widow's justice became part of the territory's history, a story of how one woman's courage inspired a town to stand against impossible odds. But for those who had lived through it, who had fought alongside Sarah Morrison, it was simply the truth about how love, determination, and a steady aim could change the world, one bullet at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.